Not hearing any. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the public hearing of our 2022 annual report. I'll turn that over to Shannon.
So we do, if you want me to go through the report, I can now, or if you want to just take testimony right now, you can. And then we can do the review at item 5.
Let's just take testimony now.
Right.
Does anyone have any comments about the annual report?
Looks good.
I just thought it was very helpful for me, just being relatively new, the background and stuff. I found it helpful.
That's good.
Oh, we were just looking at your last page. Yeah, Rick's special.
Okay. So any other comments about it? Then I think we're ready to close the public hearing for the 2022 and move on to the active agenda. The first item on the active agenda is the approval of the invoices. Can we take these as a whole, or do we need to take them individually?
I believe you can take them as a whole, and since they're all under item A.
Okay. ICRIMP is our annual policy payment of $944.50. And the second one is the annual report posting ad for $32.04. And the third one is the final payment to the city of Lewiston for the East Main interchange for $10,315.
I was going to ask a question on the ICRIMP. Is that a yearly, or is that the second, we make 2 payments a
You
year?
make 2 payments, yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then on the city of Lewiston, I think the question was asked whether or not that $10,315 was the last payment.
It is the last payment.
Okay.
Yes, I have
Good.
worked with Luke, and we got it down to the last payment.
Good. Thank you.
You bet.
I'll make the motion that we approve
I'll
the
second
invoices.
that. I'll second that motion.
Okay. It's been moved and second to approve the 3 invoices. Is there any other further discussion on them? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, just carried. The next item is the presentation of our annual fiscal audit for fiscal year 2022 by President Gage. Dawn, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. I'm Dawn Aliberti. I'll pass out my little agenda. Take one and pass it around. Is it okay if I sit?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You have an extra one.
So the audit that I'll be going through is the bound packet that you have. This is for September 30, 2022. On the cover page, you'll see that the Board of Commissioners listed there. Mr. Commissioner Tim, you'll see that you're not on there, but you weren't on there. You were not a member of the commission at that time. So that's, we didn't forget you. We purposely left you off. How's that? So the Urban Renewal Agency is a component unit of the City of Lewiston. So the financials that you see here are included in the city's financial statements, the government-wide financial statements. So more summarized in the city, but the footnotes of the loans and things like that is in the City of Lewiston's financial statements because it's a component unit. So just going to kind of point that out. So this is President Gage. We're responsible for conducting the audit following standards, giving you a reasonable assurance that the financial information presented is materially accurate. We don't give an absolute opinion. We just give a reasonable opinion. We do test-based work and that kind of thing. We don't look at every single transaction, so it's not, absolute type of opinion. The audit should really just confirm the information that you've seen throughout your meetings, through your approval of financial work that's monthly, approval of bills, that kind of thing, some of your routine transactions that happen throughout the year. So it shouldn't be too much different information. It's just presented in a different format to make sure standards are being followed. And of course, follow standards and apply for all laws that it's required to be presented. The audit report, which is the piece that belongs to Personal Gauge, the numbers and all the other information within the financial packet is that of management, you folks as the commissioners. The report, the first report that you come to is on page 3, and this is over the financial statements. And I know it's 2.5 pages long, and it really answers, does the URA's financial statements accurately reflect the revenues, expenses, and the results of net position for September 30, 2022, and we've issued a unmodified or a clean opinion, which is the best you can get, so no concerns there. The other opinion, which is on page 18, is over the controls and whether controls are operating effectively, following laws and regulations, and there is no concerns on that report as well, so there is no findings. In my little handout that I gave you, there's a section 5 that talks about communication of audit and internal control related matters, and that's just kind of a hierarchy explanation. I'm not going to read through that, but sometimes folks ask, what is the requirement of an auditor and how would you report different situations that would arise? And that's just kind of a, we have some written communications, we have weaknesses, we have different things, findings, that kind of thing. And so I just sort of outlined that on that point 5, just as an informational. So when I say that these reports are clean and no findings, and then I have no other communication as far as in writing as a management letter or any even oral changes as well that were communicated. In the packet on page 6 is the statement of net position, and I just kind of wanted to highlight a few points in the assets and the liabilities that is probably obviously the higher dollar amounts, as you can see. That cash in the bank for the URA is $1.8 million, which includes about $1.2 million of current and $600,000-ish of restricted funds. Of the $1.2 million, it's broke out by the different areas that are in operation or in the projects that are ongoing here at East Main, East Orchards, and Bryden, and I wrote that in my little note. $362,000 for East Main, Orchards is $461,000, and Bryden Avenue is $388,000. That's the cash that's sitting awaiting to be spent on those particular projects.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
So the property tax receivable, is that unpaid property taxes that are due to the URA for those revenue allocation areas?
Yes.
Okay.
The other item under the restricted is bond proceeds that's held in reserve. So that's what the restriction is on there. The other item that's of note is bonds payable. So we have a long-term portion of $1.3 million and a short-term portion of $106,000. The details for the loan are on page 13 and 14. You don't have to flip to it and look at it, but if you're curious of all what the interest rates are and what the original borrowing amount was and the amortization, that's all listed back in the footnotes. But just to highlight a few things, I think I wrote my notes. The original loan was $1,980,000. Principal payment for principal and interest for the year upon the schedule was $148,000, but an additional payment was made on the loan of $300,000 during the year. So that will bring you to the balance that's listed there.
So can I ask another question before?
No, you may not. Yes, you can.
Well, and I probably should know the answer to this, but I don't. the URA owes the city of Lewiston for a portion of the sewer project, East Main Sewer. Is that
It's
liability?
in the accounts payable, is it not?
I don't think so, because it's.
I don't think it's in the accounts payable line item, because I think it's an ongoing project.
So they bill, I think, as a project.
Um,
Do you remember, Amy?
Well, I don't remember. But it's not in the, because what's in the, there was a payment between the URA and the city that's captured in there. I just can't remember which way it went. But that was related to this 12th Street and 21st and Highway 12.
That was oh goodness, no, I don't remember either. See, we had the meeting last week.
That's right.
I'm sorry,
It
Joanne.
sounds like you're not showing it as a liability, and it's probably because it's done by MOU instead of having it done in a more traditional way.
Well, what's captured in both your payables and receivables are near term, so they're all items that were collected or paid within that 90-day window after year end.
Okay, we've not paid it within.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been any exchange between URA.
But we do owe them about, I think, $500,000. Yes.
Okay. I'd have to go look, that was 175,000 that was
That
paid.
was a payment, yeah.
It was, I'm certain it was the 21st Street
I can't
intersection.
remember what that one was. I'm sorry,
Yeah, Main East
less
Main.
prepared, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was.
On page 7 is the revenue and expenses. And of that, and I believe that East Main project, the 371 is where that is at, the 175 is in there. Net change the change in net position for the year's income, 146,000. Shows the current property taxes that have received on the different project areas of 967,000, and then the expenses associated through the 3 different categories. The page 20 of the audit, excuse me, is the breakdown in columns or form of how the revenue and expenses are broken out, which probably more looks like the information that you get on a periodic basis in this case. Page 9 is the fund accounting or governmental accounting. The only difference between this particular report and the reports that we just covered is that the loan is not on this report. So it's on the fund basis of accounting. Same with the next page is the revenue that doesn't have it has the actual payment for both principal and interest, where the other does not. Starting on page 10 is the notes to the financial statements. I am not going to read these. This goes through the accounting policies and procedures that are utilized in day-to-day activities of recording. I did point out, starting on page 13, 14, is the loan liability and the information related to that. And that is pretty much all the exciting stuff to cover. Budget versus actual. It's on page 16, shows the budget, original and final, and the actual upon. Showing the difference? No. So during our audit, we didn't have any disagreements with management, nor did we find any fraud or legal act during our audit. We aren't set out to go look for that. If it comes to our attention, then we need to report that to you. And then came to our attention as well, people came to us and say, hey, we think there's something going on. So, okay, thing, we did have, I think we identified an adjustment, but it was just kind of in a natural presentation through part of the audit the city, or the accounting was provided to us, and we made that adjustment. So other than that, that's all I have. Is there any questions other than the ones that I couldn't answer for Joanne?
Sorry.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
So of that dollar amount that you were referring to that we owe to the city of Lewiston, is that an amount that has been billed to the URA by the city of Lewiston? So it's not yet a liability, it's an agreement for them to incur charges in the future and for the URA to reimburse proportionally in the future?
Well, I
Do I
think that's
understand that
debatable.
correctly?
I think it is, I think it is a
Somewhat,
liability.
yeah. Yes, it has to do with the $1 million front for the bond.
Yes.
And so it's part of that project for the East
Okay,
Orchard sewer.
my brain was going down a deep rabbit hole with all the questions that were being asked, so remind me which project this is.
East Orchard sewer.
It's East Orchard Sewer, and the city of Lewiston fronted $1 million
Yes,
for the bond, I remember this.
yes.
And then the URA is supposed to reimburse over time as accrual comes in.
As projects continue on, then the agreement was for the city and the URA to pay 50/50. And that was done, although the URA can pay 100% to catch up on the $1 million. When we had, let's see, it was right before Laura left, in November, I believe, the city brought to us the kind of accounting of where we're at right now. And I believe it was 544,000 that we were, that when you look at the 50/50, you look at everything that came into play, where we, the URA, are behind, or the city has paid ahead.
Okay, so when people say MOU or MOA and they think that that's different from a contract, I don't believe it's different from a contract. I think MOUs are contracts. It's just we like to call them something else. So if the amount isn't due right now, then what is it in accounting speak?
It's a liability. We owe, we agreed in the plan and in the MOU to pay 50/50. And I'm probably not the one to answer this, probably.
Go ahead.
But if we agreed to pay 50/50 on the East Orchard Sewer project, in the expenses that have already occurred, we're behind on that 50/50. The expenditures that have already happened, we're behind on that 50/50. As we go forward and add more projects, we can catch up by paying 100% instead of 50/50, as Shannon indicated. But that's banking on that we're going to go forward with more projects. And right now, as of this date, we are behind on our share of the expenses that have been incurred to date. And so, in my mind, that's a liability. And I guess I kind of want to see that reflected somewhere, so we have, when we're planning ahead in the future, that we know that we have this amount that we owe for work that's already been done.
And I know from an accounting perspective, you're using the word behind, when from a legal perspective, when I hear the word behind, to me that means it's due now and we're overdue. And I don't believe that's where you're going with that. You're just saying at some point in the future, we have to pay this amount, and therefore in accounting speak, it is a liability, even though it's not due now and we're not late.
Yeah, there's
That
no
makes sense.
there's no terms on the agreement.
Right.
It's,
That to me is the defining characteristic of an MOU. It's a contract with a whole bunch of missing terms. I'm sorry, but that's really how it
It's a weak
feels.
contract.
That's how
Are
it
we
feels most
paying-
days.
Are we paying an interest on that we owe the city?
no, and why would you bring that up today?
And there is
No.
no
Well,
term for interest, so
I
it
mean, if
wouldn't
we're
be something we
behind-
could add later.
We're behind on payments.
Are we though?
No.
Well, there's no term, so we're not behind, but it is, we are expected to pay 50% of the costs that have been incurred.
And we're not paying interest on what we're behind on.
No.
Correct.
And I'm really nervous about the word behind because it
Okay.
implies that it's due, so I'm going to keep calling that out, that we owe that at some point in the future. It's a liability, but we're not behind on due payments.
That is correct.
So,
what's the downside of catching up?
There is no downside except for we didn't have, okay, so that was the issue. We have, of the money that's in reserve for the bond payment, the 600 and some thousand, 400,000 is a secondary reserve that we had to put up to get that bond because there was some concern initially with the sewer project that we wouldn't have enough money increment to make those bond payments. So Banner required a secondary reserve. And we just found out last week that we can get 200,000 of that secondary reserve released, and that reserve, even though it's in the bank, is not earning any interest. So it would be to our benefit to release that 200,000, and then we would have enough money in the East Orchard Sewer Project to potentially, if we agreed as a board, to pay back pay our share of the prior costs on the East Orchard Sewer.
so I have a question about that 200,000. That 200,000 is part of the money that the city of Lewiston put up to make sure that the bond went through. So really, it would reduce our obligation by,
200,000.
and it would reimburse them 200,000 of what they put up. So that's one way of dealing with it.
I believe the
Part of
MOU
it.
actually says that as the money gets released, we hand it over to the city.
Yes.
That's the expectation, and so that's why that would be the term, I guess, on this, that there's no payments, we're not behind on anything.
Sure.
But we have this money locked up on, because of the bond. And the MOU with the city, if I remember correctly, the wording really talked about release of those funds, then releases the money to go back to the city.
But we don't want it reflected on our books as assets that we have available to spend in the future if it really is tied up to be reimbursing the city of Lewiston.
It's restricted.
It's
on
restricted.
Here.
So
Yeah.
does restricted mean that it never comes back to us, or it's just temporarily restricted?
It's restricted, and then the MOU between the city says, once it's unrestricted, we must pay them.
Okay.
Committed.
I don't have a strong opinion on whether you should delay this and reflect it as a liability, because I'm not competent to speak on that. I feel like my question's been answered.
Okay. I defer to the accounting staff on how to best reflect that. I just want to make sure that we somewhere keep it in front of us so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Isn't it in front of you every month, though, with the reserves on the financial statements?
Not necessarily, because the reserve is 400,000, and the liability, I'm calling it a liability, the liability to the city is 544,000, so that's more than what we have in reserves. So, and if we move forward with projects,
We have 628,000 in reserves.
but the 200 and some can't be touched, the first reserve can't be touched.
Mhm.
It's only the secondary reserve that can be touched, and only when certain conditions are met. So, till the bond's paid off, that first reserve has to stay there, and really, we're only talking about 200,000. But that would reduce the amount of in my mind, that would reduce the amount of the liability of 544 by the 200,000. If we got the 200,000, paid it to the city, it would reduce the liability. But we don't see that 544 anywhere in the information that we get. And that is my concern.
If you'd like, you can delay you guys discussing and come back next month with a definite answer.
I'm okay with moving forward with the audit report, but I would like to have the accounting staff come back and tell us how we could show that liability. And going forward, when we do more projects, if we have a 50-50 cost share, how can we reflect that in the information that this board gets on a monthly basis?
We should be able to do that on the financial summaries that we do every month.
But then will that reflect differently on your audit next year, and will your audit next year look significantly different in a way that doesn't make sense from this year? So from the accountant's perspective, should the audit report be revised, or is it good as is?
I guess the internal information that you can see on a month-to-month basis doesn't have to agree with what the audit looks like at the end of the year, which it doesn't really anyway now, because for the most part, you guys look at the information on a more of a cash type basis, cash in, cash out, kind of that kind of thing. So the audit isn't mirroring that. It's very similar, but it doesn't mirror that information as it is. So a lot of financial data that's brought to boards and commissions and things like that isn't always matched. It provides a lot more, or potentially more detail than what would normally be presented in an audit. Because there's other discussions that maybe don't fit the requirement that to be included by law or by regulations to be included in the audit. Does that answer that question?
That does help me.
Yes, I'm thinking it'd be more of an internal management reporting issue, not a external financial governmental accounting standards issue.
Potentially, for the audit case, if it's felt that it's really not a liability, it doesn't necessarily belong on the balance sheet for say as a liability. However, maybe there should be a footnote. There could be a note disclosure in here that just talks about it, so the readers of the financial statements then could see that obligation, whatever you want to call the word, whatever the terminology is, actually probably just pull that from the MOU, whatever, and then probably could put it in there. In the future, or even if you want, we can kind of take these back and put something in there this year if that's what you wish.
It just came up in September or in last year, and I just don't, I can see us doing more 50-50 cost shares.
Sure.
Or cost shares and with the city in the future, and I want to make sure that we have that intercompany relationship established in a payable receivable set up so that we have some way to keep track of it.
Yeah, I'll work with Carolyn. I think what we'll do is we'll just add an additional line down into the bottom of your financial summary where your restrictions are at. And then the amount payable to city will be an additional restriction, less what's in that primary reserve or that secondary reserve. And then we'll just footnote it appropriately. And then moving forward with East Orchards, if URA is funding any of the project 100%, we'll just adjust that accordingly. We'll just have to make certain that we understand that when we're processing those bills, who's paying what, and so that we can adjust that restriction accordingly.
All right, any more comments on the annual report? On the annual audit? Sorry.
The mayor, I never have questions on audit reports, but I just have one more that I circled earlier before you guys went down the rabbit hole. When you say component unit of the city of Lewiston, considering under law the URA is a separate agency, I just wonder what component unit means. Does it just mean that it's a group of organizations that you're auditing collectively? What does that mean?
So that question comes up, so I printed the summary of state number 39. So I can hand that to you if you'd like. But
That might be easier.
So in general, it requires reporting a component unit as that arises and holds economic resources for the direct benefit of a governmental unit.
Okay.
So that is
Thank
a one sentence. So
And that's
basically
true.
the URA is holds and raises funds and is direct benefit of the city of Lewiston.
So are you suggesting that we add a footnote to this report, which would delay it till next month, or are we going to proceed?
Going forward.
Okay.
Proceed.
Okay.
Yes, the report meets the governmental accounting standards. It's just more of an internal management issue that
Sure.
I feel would be beneficial for us.
Right.
Note to self.
Yeah, note to self. Okay, so we're now on the approval of the annual audit, item C under section 5. Is there a motion to approve the annual audit?
So
Is there-
Second?
Okay, moved in second. Any other further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Well, thanks, Dawn. Sorry for the questions. You didn't want to just a boring audit presentation, did you?
No, I was telling Shannon earlier, I go, well, last week I was ready and I had all my notes, and this week, that was a week ago. I don't even know what happened yesterday, and you're
We'll keep you on your toes.
asking me details, I don't know, I didn't.
It's a good thing you didn't bring the drone footage.
I didn't bring, I know I should have the drone footage.
No, that's a good thing. We'd have been way out.
Did you want the official statement of what you're?
Yeah, that's interesting, but I don't want to bore everyone else with it. Thank you.
That actually came up during the audit committee meeting for the city of Lewiston, and so I pulled it because I know other folks have that question, and I thought I would have it to give. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay, so, I see you don't have board comments on the agenda.
We took everything off just because of the short,
Okay,
yeah, and not having a forum.
okay, okay. So the final thing on the adoption of the annual report, that's the final item on the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the annual report?
Motion.
I'll second.
Any comments? Any questions? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the annual report has been approved. The last item on the agenda is to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
All motion.
Okay,
I'll second that.
all in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Okay.
Go through the annual report.